Chapter 7 Lily White Tastes Poop. Lily White wrung a filthy washcloth in her hand uselessly before dipping it back into grimy tub water. She was in the kitchen in the dwarves' house, seated on a stool in front of a large wooden bucket, where a naked sphere of a dwarf with a wiry beard sat in soapy water. His feet were hanging out of the tub, pink like tender hams. A large bubble of foul gas suddenly popped near Lily White's face, but she merely scrunched her nose, since she couldn't spare a hand to pinch her nose as she was flossing the washcloth through Paunchy's toes. Bug wings, animal droppings, human hair, and other filth had formed a foul crust between the dwarf's toes, though Lily White had, unfortunately, come to understand that this was not unusual among dwarves, or at least not among the dwarves that lived in this particular house in the forest. At this moment of profound disgust, Lily White felt a sharp and sudden pinch to her bottom. She jumped and wheeled around with shock and rage. Pinchy, with his mischievous smile, made to walk away, having done his deed. Lily White wasn't having it this time.
"All right, that's it!"
yelled Lily White as she grabbed Pinchy and Paunchy by the beard and led them into the front room with surprising force.
"Everyone!"
she screeched at an ear-piercing volume.
"We're having a meeting right now."
Dwarves stumbled into the room in varying states of dress and sobriety. Some foamed at the mouth from drunkenness, and there were many in tighty-whities, though, regrettably, none retained their original white coloring. Nasty and his long yellow nails clattered in. Bumpy fell down the ladder from the second-floor bedroom. Stumpy wheeled in from the office, an axe in his hand and looking surly. Tricky, the self-proclaimed head dwarf, was nowhere in sight.
"All right!"
yelled Lily White to the dozens of assembled dwarves.
"I've been working my butt off here for 2 weeks, and I've had it. It's time I explain a few things to you. I'm not your maid. I'm not your mother, and I'm not your girlfriend. So I'm not gonna kiss you goodnight and tuck you in anymore. And no more moonlit walks for any of you. And that means you, Clingy."
Lily White pointed to a dwarf who had just run and attached himself to her leg with an expression of supreme joy.
"And another thing,"
she yelled, shaking herself free.
"I'm tired of getting into bed after a hard day's work and finding Dumpy's mess,"
said Lily White, as she motioned towards a rather ordinary-looking dwarf that seemed quite pleased with himself.
"And,"
continued Lily White,
"I'm tired of massaging your nasty, smelly feet every day."
"Do you mean Nasty's feet or Smelly's feet?" asked one of the dwarves.
"All of your feet, especially Nasty's and Smelly's. And you, Paunchy,"
said Lily White, rounding on the fat, naked dwarf who had somehow found a bag of potato chips and was dumping the crumbs into his mouth and beard.
"I'm tired of figuring out which of your folds to hold and which of your flabs to grab."
She ran to the kitchen and came back with the stained rag she had been using to scrub the dwarves. She forced it into Paunchy's greasy hand and said,
"You can bathe yourself from now on. And all of you, I'm tired of walking into a room and hearing all of your crude comments and snickers. You know, like, 'Do you have any fries with that shake?' And, 'Hey, Lily White, your skin is ugly, but your body looks good.' I'm sick of it. And where,"
demanded Lily White,
"is sketchy. He's supposed to have brought back my grandmother's medicine yesterday.
You mean this stuff? Asked a dwarf with a slurred voice, holding out a glass jug labeled with 4 X's. It was empty.
Drunky,
said Lily White slowly.
What happened to my grandmother's medicine?
Drank it, said Drunky with a burp.
You drank my grandmother's medicine?
Not just me, said Drunky, tipping a bit. We all did. He swayed, strong. Drunky smiled, and many dwarves nodded their agreement. Lily-White began to tear up now.
You dwarves are all so weird and gross and horrible. I'm a beautiful girl. You should be treating me like a princess because I'm humble and caring and beautiful, and maybe someday a prince will find me and rescue me from this nightmare.
Lily-White broke into open sobs. A few of the dwarves, including Nicey and Lovey, also broke into tears. At this instant of utmost emotion, Tricky shambled in from his office, a narrow pair of reading glasses hanging off his long nose. "So," he said, "I was looking at the ledger, and it shows that you're late on last week's rent, so cough it up, sister."
Rent? Rent?
Lily-White howled in fury.
How dare you! I do everything around here. I'm not gonna pay your bills, too. All you dwarves ever do is nothing. It's about time you step up and take care of yourselves.
"It's your fault, lady," said Tricky, who didn't look fazed at all by Lily-White's fury. "You signed a contract. You have a legal obligation."
All of this?
Said Lily-White, motioning in disgust to the dwarves as a group.
Wasn't in the contract.
"Oh, but it was," said Tricky, a thin grin crossing his face. "All of it." Tricky opened up his coat and pulled out the agreement that Lily-White had signed. "See? Your signature, here, agreeing to all of the terms above."
What's this?
demanded Lily-White as she seized the contract from Tricky's hand.
What's this extra fold in here? Wait, what? Get Stumpy some legs? Belly rubs? What's this about a belching contest? I didn't agree to any of this.
"Your signature," said Tricky, happy to be in his element, "clearly shows that you did agree to all of this."
Well, I'm not doing all of this,
said Lily-White, looking resolute and shoving the contract back at the dwarves. It was a little too close to Paunchy's mouth, and he involuntarily and immediately swallowed the parchment whole. "Paunchy, you idiot!" yelled Tricky, throwing his hands wildly in fists at his side. "That was my master grift!" Tricky charged at Paunchy with a look of murder in his eyes. "No, Tricky!" yelled Nicey, running to stand between him and Paunchy. "It's not Paunchy's fault. He can't control what he eats." "Yeah, it's all her fault," said Stumpy, raising his axe toward Lily-White.
"Yeah, all her fault,"
yelled another dwarf. "Get her!" yelled many dwarves in unison. They charged Lily-White, who was wide-eyed in terror. Grubby hands gripped her from all angles. There was a crash as the door flew open. Lily-White felt herself fly through the air. Then, splat! Lily-White was covered in thick, putrid, brown filth. The dwarves had thrown her into the dung heap.
Oh.
Lily-White screamed in disgust, wiping her eyes and rolling around in the slippery mess. "When you come to your senses," yelled a drunken dwarf that Lily-White couldn't see through the feces, "you can come in and make us dinner." Lily-White heard a crash as the door slammed shut again. She attempted to stand and slipped right back into the tall, thick mound of dwarf mess.
"Maybe,"
said Lily-White, spitting poo from her mouth.
"coming here wasn't such a good idea."